The past few months I've been learning how to use Blender to make buildings for my model railroad layout, and in this series of videos I want to share what I've learned. My mission is for you to have less frustrations and failed prints than I had when starting out. First, I want to warn you, learning Blender is like committing to a relationship. It will eat up a lot of your time and you'll need a lot of patience. What I'm trying to say is, if you want to use Blender, it will require some commitment. If you just want to create some simple buildings to print for your layout, then maybe Blender isn't the best option. There are many simple yet powerful CAD programs out there. When I was starting out, one side of my brain said Blender is too hard, and the other side said let's learn it anyway. So here we are. First, I recommend gathering some reference photos. Reference photos help me brainstorm ideas, and by using reference photos you're not just relying on what you think something looks like, but you're basing your work off what it actually looks like. This makes a huge difference in achieving a realistic result. Since I only have one monitor at the moment, I like to keep my reference photos on my phone while modeling. The first thing I do is figure out what type of house I want. This layout is kinda based on South African railways, but I'm not very strict at modeling a specific part of the country or sticking to a specific time. The main purpose for this layout is to learn as I go and have fun. Anyways, for the first house, I want to make it seem like it's been abandoned and rebuilt using some different bricks. But let's get started. Real quick before I start, I keep my Blender unit scale settings at default in meters, because Blender just works the best in meters. When you put the scale to really small, it sometimes can glitch and get annoying. Anyway, I start by adding a cube and scaling it to the dimensions I want this building to be, which in my case is 4.5 by 8.5 meters. And for now I make it 3 meters tall. This building will be a flat roof building, so I raise one side of the wall a bit higher, like this. For adding a door and windows, I start by adding loop cut using Shift R. And to align it to the bottom edge, so it's flat, I press E. But first, to get some reference for scale, I add in a cube that's roughly the scale of a human. This loop cut will be the top of the door frame. Then I add 8 vertical loop cuts and delete the middle face to create a door. By the way, to switch between vertex, edge and face select, I use the 1, 2 and 3 keys on my keyboard. Now I simply add in more loop cuts and delete faces where I want to add windows. You can see me using the snapping tools quite a bit. Next, I add a chimney using a cube and scaling it, again keeping everything super simple. This mesh won't even be used in the final model. The main purpose of making it is getting my vision of the building in Blender, so I can see how it looks. This also allows me to very easily make changes. Also, many times it's hard to start making something because you are unsure of what you actually want it to look like. And by making a very simple block out like this, it allows you to play around with ideas without spending too much time. I hope that makes sense. I will now use this as a guide and start making the building. For the building, I want to make it seem like it's originally built using very large bricks, but then abandoned and half destroyed. Then later rebuilt using smaller normal size bricks, but not finished and abandoned again. I hope that makes sense. For adding the large bricks, I use a cube and play around with 2 array modifiers. I add a loop cut in the middle of the brick to make the faces more square. This is important because I'll be using a simple geometry node setup to add damage to the bricks. and then we want all the faces to be about the same size and square. However, don't add unnecessary geometry, because that will make it a lot harder to manipulate later. Before applying the array modifier, I make a backup and put it in a hidden collection. This is a really good practice to do before applying modifiers. Thank me later. Now begins the process of deleting unwanted bricks and copying the bricks over to other walls. To make half bricks, I turn auto merge vertices on, and with vertex snap enabled, you can simply select faces and snap them to the middle edge like this. By the way, to select whole bricks like this, I press L to select the linked. Next, I simply copy the bricks to all 4 walls and try to make the corners look nice. This is quite boring work, however it's also quite relaxing while listening to a podcast or a YouTube video. Next, I delete a bunch of bricks. I try to make it seem as realistic as possible. After deleting a bunch of large bricks, it's time to start adding the smaller bricks. For this, I basically repeat the same process of using the array modifiers. However, because I'm not adding a roof to this building, I also want brick details on the inside. This is why I'm adding double bricks and making this a double brick wall. I don't know if there's a specific name for it. And again, I add loop cuts to make all the faces square. I also adjust the scale so 2 of the small bricks are the same height as 1 large brick. Here you see me removing the gap between the bricks, however this was a mistake and I had to fix it later. I thought it would be easier, however it ended up causing some problems with the vertices auto merging, and it also didn't look realistic. Here I'm adjusting some large bricks to make it have the same gaps as the smaller bricks. Anyway, once I'm happy with the small bricks, I again make a copy and hide the backup before applying the modifiers. I'm actually gonna fast forward this part of me doing the smaller bricks because it's super boring and repetitive. Because all I'm actually doing is deleting all the bricks that's overlapping with the large bricks and making half bricks where needed. And I'm making the corners look nice. So I'm recording this part after finishing the video, and I will just add it in a boring part of the video where I'm not talking about something I'm doing. While doing boring stuff, I like to listen to podcasts and videos from people like Blender Guru from the Andrew Price podcast, and Adam Duff from Lucid Pixel with his art talk videos, and Dr. K from Healthy Gamer and that kind of videos. Anyway, I struggle with being a perfectionist, and when you want to improve at a skill, you will improve much faster when you, for example, model 10 buildings in 10 days instead of modeling one perfect building in those 10 days. You will learn much more from making those 10 buildings than you would from trying to model one perfect building. It sounds so simple, but I really struggle with it. I tend to take things too seriously, which in my case is a bad thing. Here's another example. I originally didn't plan to record a voiceover for these videos. Instead, I wanted to record my commentary live as I make the buildings. But because I've never done that before, I really sucked at it. And instead I ended up doing a voiceover instead. Here I am, bro. And spending way too much time on a video that was supposed to only take a few hours to record. That's why I'm gonna upload this video, which is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I can sit here and improve it a lot by fixing small mistakes, trying to find better music, re-recording my voiceovers, but instead I will learn from my mistakes I made in this video and try to not make them in the next video. I'm not sure if I'll be able to record live commentary for the next videos, but I'm gonna try it anyway. And if I suck too much, I'll maybe record a voiceover again for one, but I'm gonna improve and I will get it. But yeah, that's one of the main things I've been working on lately. Because what does it help when you have the skills, but your perfectionism holds you back from doing it? Here's another example. I'm sitting here writing what I want to say, and I have the urge to rewrite everything. But instead I will leave it as it is and record it, which I'm doing right now. To make the bricks follow the slight angle of the roof, I'm actually gonna use a boolean modifier. I usually don't like using boolean modifiers because it's hard to use correctly without messing up the geometry completely. I use a massive cube as my cutter object like this. After applying the modifier, it's important to check for any errors. For this I use the 3D printing toolbox add-on. If you don't have it, it's an add-on that comes with Blender by default. You can simply enable it in the preferences. Blender comes with so many cool add-ons. Another add-on I always use is Loop Tools. The fastest way to cut windows is also using a boolean modifier. For the cutter object, I copy the edges from the basic model that we made as a guide. Then I simply extrude it to make it as a cube. However, here you can see it doesn't work as intended, and that's actually because my cutter object has inverted normals. To view the face orientation, you can enable it in this menu. This is an easy fix. In edit mode where the face is selected, press Shift N. This recalculates the normals. Then I repeat the same process for the two windows in the back wall. After applying the modifiers, I delete the very small bricks and fix any errors that may have been created. Okay, now let's give the chimney some bricks. For this I take a brick from the main wall and simply duplicate it a few times until I have the first layer consisting of 2 bricks high. Then I simply duplicate and move it upwards until complete. You could also use an array modifier for this, however sometimes it's faster to simply do it manually like this. Here I'm trying to figure out how I want to position the chimney. I decided I want to have it intersecting with the wall like this, so I removed the bricks that were in the way. let's move on to using physics to make part of the wall look collapsed. This was actually the first time I've tried to use physics to do this, so I was wasting quite a bit of time trying to figure out how it works, but here's what you have to do to make it work. Select all the bricks that you want to apply physics to and press P, and separate the selection to a new object. Now I'm gonna separate all the bricks, but before doing that I put them in a separate collection just to make it easier. Next, in edit mode, separate them by loose parts. I also add a plane as a floor for the bricks to land on, so they don't just fall into the Blender void. With the floor plane selected, open the physics tab and enable a rigid body, and change the body type from active to passive. Next, with all the bricks selected, right click and select Set Origin to Geometry. This is important because it will be like the center of gravity of each brick. Next, I select all the bricks and make sure one of them is the active selection, like this. And also enable a rigid body with the body type set to active, basically using the default settings. At the moment it's only being applied to the active selected object and not to all of them. So to copy the settings to all of them, press F3 and search for copy from active. And now it's simulating properly. However, it's not interacting with the rest of the wall at the moment. So to fix that, select the wall and enable a rigid body and change the type from active to passive. Then under the collisions tab, change the shape from convex heel to mesh, and it should work properly. Now it's simply a matter of adjusting the bricks and simulating until you get them to land as you like. Make sure you save very often while working with this, because I had quite a lot of crashes at this stage. By the way, I'm using version 4.2.1. If you made it this far in the video, first of all, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. And comment, Blender is the best. Let's see how many people will comment. To apply the simulation and freeze the bricks in place, select all the bricks you want to freeze and go to Object, Rigid Body and click Apply Transformations. Then you can join them back into one object with Ctrl J. And finally, I join all the simulated bricks back to the walls they belong to. And now let's move on to making the damage. Before starting in geometry nodes, I first separate all the smaller bricks from the larger ones. It will be much easier to work on a collection of bricks that's all the same size. One more thing before moving on to the next step is using the 3D printing toolbox add-on to check for any errors and fixing them. It's important to fix errors while the mesh is still very simple and not subdivided yet. With all the same size bricks now in different objects like this, we can start setting up the nodes. Don't worry, this is a very simple node setup and it only takes a few minutes. To start, I separate a single brick and move it aside so it's easy to see what we are doing, and also set the origin to geometry. Now split the viewport and open a geometry node editor. With the brick selected, click New. The first node will be a subdivision surface node. Then I add a noise texture node and a math node set to power. And I connect the color of the noise texture to the base of the math node. Next I add a vector math node set to multiply, connecting the values from the math node on the vector math node, then add a normal node on the other vector input like this. Next we need a set position node, and connect the subdivision surface to the geometry input on the set position node. Also connect the vector math node to the offset of the set position. Next we'll need a mesh boolean and change the operation from difference to intersect, and connect the group input directly to the mesh input on the mesh boolean. And also connect the set position to the same input on the mesh boolean, and finally connect the mesh boolean to the group output. You can change the noise texture from 3D to 4D noise to have more control. Now just play around with the exponent in the math node. To have more detail in the damage, increase the subdivision surface level. However, try to keep it as low as possible, because it will get very hard to handle for your computer if you increase it too much. I recommend keeping it between level 1 and 3. And play around with the noise scale to increase or decrease the damage roughness. Finally, I also add a triangulate node. This just makes it look a bit better, and in my experience it prevents some weird errors from occurring. However, I still need to play around with this a lot more. But that's the node setup. It's not my original creation. I've watched almost every video on YouTube trying to figure out what's the best and simplest way to do this. Definitely play around with the values and see what works for you. But don't go crazy with the values, because I found that creates holes in the mesh. To apply it to the bricks, you can select the wall and shift click the brick with the damage and copy the modifier from active selection using Ctrl L. Alternatively, you can select the object you want to apply it to and go to Modifiers tab and add a geometry node modifier and select the node tree we just made. When you apply it to a bunch of objects like this, it's inevitable that there's gonna be some bricks that glitch and look like this. I just go into edit mode and slightly adjust the scale and try to move them a bit, and most of the time this resolves the errors. But sometimes that doesn't work and you'll have to fix them after applying the modifier. For the smaller bricks, I make a copy of the node tree, so when I change the scale, it won't affect the larger bricks. I've also found that it works best to separate all the bricks like this. And again, I play around with the settings until I'm quite happy with how it looks and I don't see that many errors. Also, because it's gonna be printed in quite a small scale, in my case HO scale, it's a good idea to exaggerate the effect, otherwise it won't even be visible. I've also been increasing the gap between the bricks for my latest buildings, because if you make it the same scale as in real life, it won't look good when printed in a small scale. So definitely try exaggerating some of these details. After applying the modifiers, I fixed all the errors. I found that it's really helpful to have the face orientations enabled for this step. This allows me to easily see holes in the mesh and fix them. The most common issue are simple holes like this. However, sometimes there are also inside faces, and you have to go inside and delete them. And then I repeat the process until the damage is applied to all the bricks. Making an inner wall to connect all the bricks together so they aren't free floating anymore is usually one of the easiest steps. However, for this building, it's gonna be quite a long and complicated process because of all the missing bricks. I really don't know how I'm gonna explain this, but I'll try my best. So I start by adding a cube and scaling it so it's just a bit inside the outline of the bricks like this. Next, I use the knife tool to cut out the areas where the bricks are missing. The main purpose of this is connecting all the bricks together without it being visible in areas like this where the part of the wall is collapsed. This being a double brick wall complicates things even more, because the bricks differ from side to side. Here you can kinda see how I do it. There's not much to it, simply extrude and move faces and try to keep it as simple as possible. Using the snapping tools and auto merge vertices is also really useful. Toggling X-ray mode is also really handy for seeing and selecting through the bricks. If you didn't know, the keyboard shortcut is Alt-Z. I also keep my 3D printing toolbox add-on open and check my mesh quite often. I don't know about you, but I actually enjoy doing this quite a bit. It's not that complicated and it stimulates the problem solving part of your brain. It's like solving a puzzle. And it's quite good practice to get faster at using the Blender tools. Here I'm using a cube and making a very simple door frame like this. There really isn't much to it. I didn't even know if a door frame would look good here, but trying never hurts. Except when you spend too much time on it and don't end up using it. And all you learn is that the time could be better spent on something else. However, I actually ended up keeping the door frame. I also made a simple floor like this. The next step will be joining everything together. However, that's quite a complicated process, but before moving on to that, I make sure to individually check all the walls for any problems in the mesh. I spent about an hour or two fixing these problems. After a long time of solving problems, it's finally time to start joining everything together. For a long time I didn't know how to join everything together into one watertight or manifold mesh, but after watching this video from Arts and Survival, where he showed a method of using the mesh boolean node in geometry nodes to do it, so let me show you how it's done. I take everything I want to join together and duplicate and place it in a new collection. It's very important to make a backup of the original model before you start with this process. To make it a bit easier for my PC, I don't try to join them all together at once. Instead, I do one brick wall section at a time. Join them together like this, then I add a mesh boolean in geometry nodes and change it from difference to union. And then also change the solver from float to exact. The float option is a simple solver for best performance without support for overlapping geometry. And the exact solver takes all the overlapping geometry and tries to join everything into one watertight mesh, but it's much more resource intensive. After applying this, I had only 6 non-manifold edges, but that's an easy fix. Then I simply repeat the process until all the brick wall sections are combined with the main mesh, and I'm left with one object. After adding a brick wall section, I make sure to check for non-manifold edges and fix them. Once done, I export it as a STL, and when importing into a Halot box, it doesn't give me any warnings that there is a problem with my model, which is just awesome. I quickly added a few supports to do a test print and it printed as expected. This is how it looks on my small layout. I can't wait to see it painted.